Hi, Claire Van Seth here. Welcome back to Egan High School. The lesson that I shared for my favorite unit is my ELL Civics class. We typically do ELL Civics in ninth grade, and the unit is Public Policy Letter Writing, which typically comes at the end of the year. The standards being taught are the Minnesota State Social Studies standards about civics. They are to examine a public policy issue by defining a problem, developing alternative courses of action, evaluating the consequences of each alternative, selecting a course of action, and designing a plan to implement the action and resolve the problem. The second one is demonstrate skills that enable people to monitor and influence state, local, and national affairs. So basically they're both talking about in civics class, if there's a problem, what can students and really anyone do to solve that problem? And of course we have to identify what level of government first would best solve the problem in order to determine the best person who could address the problem. The transfer goal of this unit is students will learn how to select a public policy issue that is important to them and their community. So they get to select their topics, how to successfully research that issue using credible sources, which we already talk about, and I give them a list of different credible resources in several languages. Summarize arguments of different perspectives, select and articulate an appropriate stance on the issue, so explain what is going on with the issue and why they chose the stance that they did. Select an appropriate audience that may be able to change the policy, so again, identifying which level of government would be the best choice to solve the issue. For example, if you're interested in changing school start times, you would most likely be contacting someone who is elected to the school board, whereas if you chose the issue of immigration policy, typically a congressman or congresswoman. They will share how they might be able to affect change on that issue. So asking the person in that part of government to take a specific action that would solve the problem, and then stating how they could also get involved with this issue in their community. Finally, students will demonstrate how to share their voice with the people who can make public policy and be a part of our American democracy, even if they are not yet a citizen. What students are taking out of this unit that they can use in later studies or in other academic areas are how to participate in our democracy, so how to get involved in government, and really that everyone is able to affect change in the government by communicating with elected officials. For me, this is a lifelong skill that people should have. Especially in the United States, we're lucky enough that you can have a say in government. I don't always think students who come from countries with very stable governments or governments that are corrupt realize this. So it's important for them to realize now in the United States they have an opportunity to get a say in government. How do I help students make that connection? It's pretty explicit because they must include in their letter why the topic they chose is important to them, why they chose it, and how they might be able to get involved in the issues. And then at the end of the unit, once they finish writing the letter, we actually mail them to the people that the students wrote to. Actually, 3 years ago, Keith Ellison wrote an entire letter back to my class when he was my class's representative. So that was pretty cool. So how do I explain to students why this unit is important? And again, the idea of just getting involved in government, getting your voice out there. I'm hoping students really pick up on because they do have a lot of great ideas, and there are a lot of people that would like to hear their ideas. So helping them find an avenue to share all of these good ideas and experiences that they have is incredibly important, not just for my students and for their communities, but for the entire United States. As a democracy, we need to include as many voices as possible. So the essential questions of how can I share my voice with an elected official and how can I affect change in public policy are really things that we should all be thinking about. Just a brief review of everything else in the unit. Foundational content. I'm teaching students how to write a formal or business letter, as well as how to address an envelope, and that if you are to sign your name, it should always be in pen. Those are the foundations of our letter writing unit. The assessment timeline: each day's activity will be a part of the letter writing process. So for example, one day they need to pick an appropriate audience member and then find that audience member's address. Well, that eventually turns into what they put in their envelope. And for another day, they're doing research using credible resources, and they have to find quotes, and eventually they will include one specific quote in their letters. So the structure of the letter is pretty laid out. The first paragraph, they're introducing themselves, introducing the topic, and explaining why the topic's important to them. In the second paragraph, they explain what are the sides of the issues, basically explaining the research. The third paragraph is taking a stance on the issue and suggesting a solution for the elected official or a way that they might become involved. And then the final paragraph is a thank you, where students suggest a specific way they might also be able to participate in government. As I said, this unit happens towards the end of the school year, so we've already studied the different levels of government, what each level does, who their elected officials are, and as well as political parties, voting, and elections. So they should be familiar with all of these concepts needed in order to create this project. For the unit, on day one, I collected What Bugs Me homework. I used this homework to help select topics that are relevant to students that they may be able to choose from. And then we also have a review activity where the students write down who all of their elected officials are. Eventually, they'll select one of their elected officials as their audience member for their letter. On day two, we talk about why specifically writing a letter to an elected official is important and what elected officials think about getting letters from students. So that's what the TED Talk is about. Then we go over what specifically the structure of a letter looks like through a Brain Pop video, as well as the accompanying activities, and then students work either individually or with their small group as an introduction about the structure of a letter. On day three, we introduce the topic, and students are able to select their topics. Day four is when students start their research. We have a news article analysis that they do, and eventually they're going to use a quote from one of their research articles. Day five is when they outline the issue, and eventually they'll use this in paragraph 2 of their formal business letter, stating the two sides of the issue and what the major arguments are for each. Day 6, students continue to work on those things, but then they also identify an appropriate audience for their letter, and they can start working on their letter template. And their letter template really lays out what should be in each paragraph with sentence starters and some structure for each paragraph. Then they continue working on their packets, again with sentence starters for them. Day 8 is typing in the computer lab. This usually takes more than one day, so students are usually in the library afterwards. trying to get this typed. And then we do peer editing where they work in groups of 3. And I have a peer editing form that they fill out. I also print out 2 copies for the other members of the group to mark up corrections as they go along. On the last day of the unit, we adjust the envelope, finish peer editing, create a final draft of the letter, and then print and sign 2 copies that are sent in the mail. 1 copy I grade, the other one gets sent to the specific audience member. This is how the unit implements the Universal Design for Learning, and this is the different culturally responsive teaching strategies that are implemented within the unit. Thank you so much for watching this presentation. I hope it was helpful to you and that you learned more about our EL Civics unit of public policy letter writing. Thank you.